You will not believe what was revealed after the shrimp cocktail. It's the kind of betrayal that makes you question a lifetime of choices. The kind that starts an empire-level war. This story begins with a plate of ruined pasta, but ends with a dynasty being redefined. You have been warned. This secret, buried for decades, is about to surface. The truth is always more expensive than the lie. Keep watching, because the full cost is only revealed at the very end. The chandelier light, usually so flattering in the exclusive Beverly Hills Italian spot, Illinois Sapor Antico, only magnified the contempt in her eyes. 82 years old, and Eleanor, Ellie, Harrington was enduring what felt like the most humiliating moment of her long, formidable life. The sound of her vintage ceramic dinner plate flown from Tiffany's pristine hand, shattering across the inlaid marble floor, was not just a noise, it was a detonation. Everything stopped, the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of baccarat crystal, the easy flow of Chianti. Every face, from the maitre d' to the hedge fund billionaire at the next table, was directed at us. I saw the glint of tomato sauce on my favorite silk suit, the one my late husband, Frederick, bought me for our 50th anniversary. It wasn't the stain that burned, it was the sheer, icy public disrespect. And William, my only son, a man of 55 who should have been my defender, simply stared at his empty water glass as if searching for a life raft. "Mother, perhaps you should leave," he mumbled, his voice a low, painful drone that lacked any conviction. 60 years ago, I'd survived the sudden death of my twin sister. 40 years ago, I'd secretly taken the reins of a multi-million-dollar real estate firm. But nothing made me feel as small, as utterly insignificant, as my own son's abandonment in that moment. This dinner, my 82nd birthday celebration, had been a manufactured truce. William, after months of dodging calls and clipping our conversations short, had insisted. He said Tiffany had reluctantly agreed to a civilized evening. Tiffany, the woman who had systematically erected a fortress around my grandchildren, Jackson and Scarlett, aged 15 and 13, cutting me out of their lives for the better part of 2 years. I had worn Frederick's platinum locket, feeling the weight of it like a piece of sacred armor, hoping it would ward off the venom I knew was coming. Il Sapor Antico was far outside my rumored budget. I supposedly lived off Frederick's modest inheritance, but William had claimed it was a necessary gesture. I even brought a small, leather-bound book, meticulously assembled with decades of photographs. William's gap-toothed elementary picture, his awkward high school dance photos, even the shot of him holding newborn Scarlett. My plan was to look through it, a quiet gesture of connection, after the dessert I naively thought we would share. That was my second mistake. From the moment I arrived, Tiffany didn't bother to lift her gaze from her massive diamond-encrusted phone. She gave a curt, almost hostile nod, her long, unnaturally perfect fingernails tapping out an urgent rhythm. William's hug was perfunctory, a social obligation rather than a display of warmth. Still, I smiled, forcing the old matriarchal charm. I asked about Jackson's college applications and Scarlett's equestrian lessons. "They are perfectly fine, Eleanor," Tiffany bit out, not even pausing her furious scrolling. "And they're quite busy. They don't need your cheap little trinkets." I ignored the familiar, sharp sting, reaching for my handbag. "I brought a small gift for Scarlett's birthday next week. Just a delicate vintage brooch I thought she'd cherish." Tiffany finally looked up. Her eyes were pools of frozen mercury. "We have already told you, haven't we? Scarlett has too much clutter. She doesn't need your hand-me-down garbage. Why are you always trying to buy their affection when you were a disastrous mother to William?" The words were an expertly aimed shot below the belt. My throat instantly seized. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. "You never do you?" Tiffany's voice rose, delighting in the nearby attention. "Always the victim. Poor, fragile Eleanor, abandoned in her oversized house like some tragic old movie star. If you hadn't been so absolutely suffocating, William wouldn't have needed years of therapy." Therapy? This was an agonizing new detail. I turned to William, who kept his focus rigidly on his napkin. "It's nothing major, Mother. Just, things." But Tiffany had already launched her final attack. Tell her, William. Tell her how she manipulated your entire life. How you never got to choose your own path. How she made you exactly what she wanted, not what you needed. I sat, paralyzed, my blood thundering in my ears. The waiter, sensing the seismic shift at our table, slid my untouched plate of pasta in front of me with painful slowness. I reached out for William's arm, desperate for contact. Sweetheart, I truly did not know. That was when Tiffany stood up, lifted my plate, and sent it crashing down. You witch, she hissed, her voice a theatrical whisper that nonetheless carried across the room. You never should have come here. Tears blurred my vision, but a strange, granite-hard resolve began to form deep within my core. Dignity, indeed, was all I had left. I stood, my trembling hand clutching my purse. My sincere apologies for ruining your dinner, I said, my voice shockingly steady. I walked out, the whispers and stares of the wealthiest people in the room clinging to me like cheap cologne. In the parking lot, inside the vintage Mercedes William and Tiffany believed was my only vehicle, I did not collapse. I drove home, gripping the wheel, the silence of the night condemning me. Every memory in the house Frederick and I bought 60 years ago, seemed to mock me. It felt hollow, a tomb. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in Frederick's old study, staring at the pictures in the little album. Had I been controlling? Had I truly destroyed his childhood? The grief was overwhelming, but by the time the first sun rays hit the horizon, the sorrow had been replaced by a quiet, burning fury. I had spent too long pleading for crumbs of affection. No more. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't touched in nearly 10 years. The firm of Sinclair and Shaw. How may I direct your call? A perfectly modulated voice answered. Hello, this is Eleanor Harrington, I said, the name sounding foreign, sharper on my tongue. Please tell Mr. Sinclair that I require his immediate assistance. The game has changed. The wheels of what was to come had begun their silent, terrifying turn. On Monday morning, just as the housekeeper was setting out her imported tea service, Tiffany received the meticulously drafted correspondence. I knew she had, because she called William at his investment banking office, leaving a trail of 7 increasingly frenzied voicemails over 10 minutes. When William finally connected with her, she was reportedly pacing their enormous, perfectly manicured kitchen, waving the thick envelope as if it contained anthrax. She had every reason for the theatrics. The letter, written with the formal elegance of a Supreme Court ruling, stated that the exclusive platinum credit card Tiffany used daily, the one for the Rodeo Drive boutiques, the annual Aspen ski rentals, the impossibly expensive health supplements, had been suspended indefinitely. Worse yet, the private, discretionary, checking account she believed William had set up for her personal indulgence was, and had always been, solely in my name. And I, Eleanor Harrington, 82 years old and fragile, had just yanked the financial rug out from under her manicured feet. You see, the truth that William and Tiffany had never bothered to look for, the truth I had carefully obscured, was the depth of my involvement in their extravagant lifestyle. Not out of a desire to control, as Tiffany perpetually claimed, but out of an aging mother's desperate, silent love. Now it was time for the education. 3 days after the Italian fiasco, I sat opposite Robert Sinclair, my longtime corporate attorney, in his opulent, wood-paneled office. The same office where Frederick and I had first formalized the Articles of Incorporation for Harrington Global Properties 60 years ago. Are you absolutely certain about this, Ellie? Robert asked, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, his voice a low rumble of concern. This will cause an earthquake, not just a tremor. I'm certain, Robert, I replied, my voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed resilience. More certain than I have ever been. I had spent a lifetime building, quietly supporting, and enduring. The rest of my life would not be spent apologizing for my own power. The reality was, after Frederick's sudden, devastating cardiac event 25 years ago, I had not, as everyone, including William, assumed, sold the company. I took over. Silently. Discreetly. I had become the uncredited backbone of Harrington Global Properties, navigating market crashes, hostile takeovers, and changing global regulations. Publicly, I was the grieving, retired widow living off a pension. Privately, I was the CEO, signing the major deals, the true architect of the firm's $50 million net worth. I had kept this reality from William. He genuinely believed I lived a quiet, subsidized life, maintaining the huge house out of sentimental stubbornness. But the palatial property William and Tiffany occupied, the one in the ultra-exclusive neighborhood with the high-rated schools and the celebrity neighbors, was not theirs. It was mine. I had purchased the home years ago through a complex offshore trust and secretly arranged for them to buy it back on an obscenely slow, heavily subsidized repayment plan, structuring the payments as tax-advantaged gifts to William. They had been too blinded by the incredible deal to ask the necessary questions. I had told myself I was protecting William's pride, allowing him the illusion of independence. Now I saw it for what it was, a weakness Tiffany exploited to its absolute limit. Robert gently folded the demand letter I had prepared and placed it in a secure envelope. "This goes out today," he stated. "Prepare yourself." I nodded, standing. It is time for truth in this family. And the truth, in my case, comes with a rather significant paper trail. That very afternoon, my phone rang. The screen displayed William's panicked number. I let it ring for precisely 3 full rotations, allowing the anticipation to build a fortress around me. "Hello," I answered, my voice deliberately measured. "Mom?" William's voice was high, tight with panic. "What in God's name is happening?" "I assume," I replied calmly, "this is regarding the letter Tiffany received. A letter that simply reflects the reality of my accounts." A long, agonizing pause. "You froze her spending card." "Yes, William. It is my account, and I have funded her daily excess for the last 15 years. Another, more brittle silence. "What are you talking about?" "We need to speak in person," I said softly yet firmly. "There are several financial realities we need to review. About the house, about your finances, and about the complete truth." "My house?" His voice was a strangled question. "What about my house?" I closed my eyes briefly. It was time for the final, devastating reveal. "It is in my trust, William. It has been for almost 10 years. The silence this time was not awkward. It was the crushing, heavy silence of a man watching his entire perceived reality collapse around him. "I have the mortgage," he finally managed, a desperate edge to his voice. "I make the payments every month." "Yes," I agreed. "To a specialized foundation I established for Jackson and Scarlett's future education. You are paying into their college fund, not into a mortgage." "You're making all of this up," he accused, his voice shaking with furious denial. "Just to punish us for what Tiffany said." "No," I countered, the softness of my voice cutting deeper than any scream. "This has nothing to do with that dinner. This is about a lifetime of silence, William. On both our parts. You have always been so controlling," he spat, echoing Tiffany's poisonous words. The barb landed, not because it was true, but because it confirmed the depth of Tiffany's indoctrination. Still, I did not allow my emotion to show. "I will be home all afternoon," I stated. "If you wish to discuss this, bring Tiffany. All the paperwork will be ready." And before he could utter another defense, I gently hung up the phone. My hands, resting on the smooth cherry wood of my desk, were not trembling with fear, but with the exhilaration of absolute resolve. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. William stood on the porch alone. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his face a mask of exhaustion and raw, barely contained rage. "Prove it," he demanded, stepping past me without preamble. I had fully anticipated this. I led him directly to the grand dining table, which I had transformed into a legal war zone. Deeds, tax records, trust documentation, 5 years of detailed, color-coded bank statements, and a terrifyingly complete breakdown of Tiffany's unchecked spending all were laid out under focused spotlights. He shuffled through the documents, his movements jerky, as if the legal jargon was written in an alien alphabet. This simply cannot be real," he muttered, his voice reduced to a pathetic, choked whisper. "It is perfectly real," I confirmed gently. "You genuinely thought I lived off a small stipend, William. The truth is, I am Harrington Global Properties. I just never sought the credit for it." But why? He looked up at me, my son, the man I had sacrificed everything for after Frederick died. The boy I had wanted to protect. Because you made it profoundly clear that you did not want my help, I explained, the deep, old pain in my voice finally audible. But you desperately needed it. And I needed a way to remain relevant in your life, even if you couldn't see the hand that was holding you up. He finally met my gaze, and for a fleeting, heartbreaking moment, I saw the vulnerable, confused boy he once was. The man had grown up, but somewhere along the line, he had been systematically convinced that the greatest threat to his happiness was his own mother. "Does Tiffany know the full truth?" he asked, barely audible. "No," I said. The letter was her introduction to my reality. He ran a hand through his perfectly groomed hair, a gesture identical to one Frederick used when he was overwhelmed. It pierced my heart. "She is absolutely hysterical," he said finally. "She thinks you are viciously punishing her." I offered no response. Then he looked at me, truly looked at me, with an unsettling mixture of admiration and horror. "I don't believe I know who you are at all." That statement, delivered with quiet, profound grief, somehow stung more than Tiffany's most public venom. The very next morning, the confrontation I knew was inevitable arrived. I heard the unmistakable slam of a luxury car door, followed by Tiffany's voice, a furious, high-pitched shriek cutting through the quiet morning air. "William, we need to talk now." I was in the kitchen, carefully measuring loose-leaf tea, trying to fortify my steel-plated resolve. I took my time walking into the vast living room, holding the mug in both hands like a fragile, yet powerful, shield. William was pacing, frantic and distraught. Tiffany was right behind him, clad in an outrageously expensive travel coat, cinched tight over a perfect silk dress. Her lips were already curled into a snarl of righteous indignation. "Good morning, children," I said calmly. "Perhaps a cup of chamomile?" "Cut the condescending act, Eleanor," Tiffany snapped. "What is this psychotic power play you're orchestrating?" I settled into Frederick's ancient, comfortable leather armchair, the creak of the leather beneath me a familiar, solid reassurance. "It's not a game, Tiffany," I countered softly. "It's simply an overdue conversation about the reality of your finances." William stopped his pacing. "Mom, you simply cannot freeze her main account." That was incredibly spiteful. I allowed one eyebrow to lift slightly. "Spiteful? To stop funding your wife's five-figure monthly private spending?" "I was curious, Tiffany," I pressed on, my voice still light, conversational. "Why would the card being declined at Saks Fifth Avenue, in front of people you know, be so profoundly upsetting? Unless you knew exactly where the money was originating from all along." Her jaw hardened. I saw the tiny, incriminating flicker in her eyes. She had suspected, at least some of it. "You are trying to control us," she hissed, the accusation worn smooth from overuse. "Just as you controlled William's entire life. He told me how you destroyed his self-esteem by micromanaging his career." I turned to William. "Is that truly what you believe?" He avoided my gaze. "You always had an opinion, Mother. Even when I didn't ask for it." "That is the nature of good parenting, William," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "Guidance and protection. Especially when one is widowed early." Tiffany crossed her arms, a viper preparing to strike. "Love is not suffocation, Eleanor." I leaned forward, setting my teacup down with a precise, echoing clink. "And manipulation is not a substitute for independence, Tiffany. But you already know that, don't you?" William was utterly submerged, looking from one of us to the other like a man drowning in a sudden, brutal riptide. "We don't need your money," he blurted out. "I make more than enough to cover our lifestyle." "No, William," I countered flatly, the silence I let follow being the loudest word in the room. "You don't. I have seen your balance sheets. Your current monthly outflow, at fair market value for the house alone, consumes almost 80% of your take-home pay. Add the private academies, the international vacations, and the boutique services." I trailed off, allowing the terrifying figures to hang in the air. "What exactly are boutique services?" William demanded, his eyes narrowing, finally showing some intellectual curiosity. I reached for a thick, labeled file on the side table and handed it to him. Tiffany's face instantly went white as he opened it. This is a grotesque invasion of privacy, she sputtered, lunging for the folder. You've been spying on us. No, I corrected, shrugging slightly. I have been reviewing my own business accounts. The ones that have been subsidizing your life. William flipped through the pages, his confusion giving way to cold, horrified realization. Luxury boutique services, he muttered, reading the precise, damning line item. What in the hell does that entail, Tiffany? She shifted nervously. Spa treatments. High-end skincare. You know, I have to maintain a professional appearance for your firm's charity events. For the children. $15,000 a month? William asked, his voice dead flat. For 1 month? There is a very exclusive, discreet retreat in the Bahamas, I offered quietly. Known for specialized, non-surgical cosmetic enhancements. Tiffany's cheeks flamed crimson. You are truly despicable, she spat. How dare you violate my privacy like this? I didn't violate anything, dear, I said, my gaze unwavering. You violated my gratitude. And my bank account. William turned another page. 10,000 here. 15,000 there. Tiffany, what are these enormous cash withdrawals? He asked, finally looking at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time. I don't know. I can't remember, she stammered. You don't know, he repeated, his voice rising, his disbelief shattering the last of his loyalty. Is that the best you can manage? I remained silent. This was William's moment to claim. I will not stand here and be interrogated, Tiffany declared, grabbing her massive leather handbag. This is a disgusting witch hunt. I refuse to participate. She turned to William, her face a mask of desperate panic. Are you coming with me? She is trying to destroy us, William. Just like she always has. I watched William. His eyes were still fixed on the damning file. He had not looked at her once since she had tried to slam the folder shut. She's using her millions to control you. Tiffany hissed, her desperation palpable. Don't you dare let her come between us. Then she stormed out, slamming the front door with a resounding crack that rattled the crystal in the cabinet. William just stood there, the file folder clutched to his chest like a lifeline. I felt my own heartbeat in my throat, afraid to speak, afraid he would follow her. Instead, he looked at me, the ghost of his childhood now fully eclipsed by the burden of his adulthood. Mom, his voice broke. The choice has always been yours, William, I whispered. It always will be. He let out a long, ragged exhale. I need time, he said finally. Time to just think. And he walked out, the undeniable evidence of his life of illusion still tightly in his grip. The next 2 days passed in a strange, agonizing vacuum. No call, no text, no communication from William, just the oppressive, soul-crushing silence that only a loved one can inflict. Silence, I have found, is often the loudest indicator of a world fracturing. I dealt with the suspense the way I always had after Frederick's passing. I cleaned. Not the superficial surface-level cleaning for appearances. I mean the deep, ruthless, tooth and nail cleaning, scrubbing grout, reorganizing every cabinet, polishing every inch of the house until the air felt sterilized and ready for the next phase. By Thursday afternoon, I had alphabetized my extensive library for the second time and was debating whether to wax the ceiling when the doorbell finally rang. My heart executed a perfect backflip. I quickly pulled off my heavy rubber gloves, smoothed my dress, and opened the door. It was William. He looked like he'd been fighting the entire time, disheveled, weary, but oddly focused. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the infamous file folder now joined by a separate, smaller, slightly crumpled envelope. He didn't want tea, he didn't want coffee. I found something, he stated, his voice flat, exhausted. He dropped the envelope onto the granite counter. I opened it slowly. Inside were bank statements, but these were not mine. The logos were foreign, the banks utterly unrecognizable to me. Transactions from accounts I'd never audited. And then I saw the damning location. Fidelity Private Banking, Cayman Islands branch. My stomach lurched. A dark, cold certainty settled in my gut. What exactly is this, William? I asked, though I already knew the grim answer. She has a secret account, he said, his eyes hollow. Tiffany. She's been systematically siphoning money into it for years. Over $300,000, all of it from our joint accounts. Or should I say, your accounts. I felt the floor subtly shift beneath me. How far did this deceit run? How did you obtain this, William? I asked, gripping the counter edge for stability. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. I hired a private investigator, he said. I blinked, stunned by his sudden, decisive action. I had no choice, Mom. After what you showed me, I couldn't ignore the holes anymore. I needed to know the full extent of the rot. I nodded slowly, the knot of tension tightening in my chest. And his report is worse than I feared. He slid another devastating sheet across the counter. It was a stack of printed-out emails, dating back 2 years. They were communications between Tiffany and a man named Marcus F., an investment advisor from Arizona. The emails were chillingly intimate and contained receipts for shared flights, hotel check-ins in various exotic locales, and the final, gut-punching blow, candid photos of them embracing on a yacht. She's been planning an exit, William explained, the words tasting like ash. She and Marcus were planning to take Jackson and Scarlett and permanently relocate to a private island once she had accumulated enough cash to sustain them. I sat down heavily on the nearest stool. All the designer purchases, the boutique services, the massive cash withdrawals, they weren't for maintenance or show. They were the meticulously calculated costs of abandoning her family. I reached for his hand, half expecting him to flinch. He didn't. She has lied to me for the better part of a decade, he said, his voice a desolate landscape. I defended her to you. I believed her when she said you were the invasive, controlling monster. God, I was so wrong. We were both fooled, William, I said, gently squeezing his hand. She is a master manipulator. He shook his head, refusing my soft exoneration. I should have seen the signs. The unexplained absences, the perpetual excuses, how she always had a flimsy reason for the missing money. He looked down, then back up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. What do I do now, Mom? She is going to try to take my children. I took a deep, steadying breath, allowing the reality of the situation to settle. You protect your children, William, I said, the matriarchal steel fully present in my voice. You do not let her snatch them away. You call Robert Sinclair right now. You tell him to file for emergency, temporary full custody of Jackson and Scarlett. And you use every piece of this evidence. He gave a bitter, humorless smile. Already done. Turns out when a private investigator's report reads like a soap opera involving a foreign bank account, the legal system moves with remarkable efficiency. And the children? They are currently with her sister, Sharon, who is thankfully impartial. But I want them here. In this house. Our home. My heart soared, overcoming the horror of Tiffany's betrayal. Of course, I said, standing and placing my hand firmly on his shoulder. This house has always been their sanctuary. It is your home, William. I need your help, Mom, he reiterated, his eyes earnest and sincere. I don't know how to explain the sheer depth of this betrayal to Jackson and Scarlett. They are too young to understand the complexity of her lies. But they need stability. I nodded, my resolve complete. We will take it slowly. We will give them the one thing a mother cannot give them right now. Consistency and truth. Just enough of the truth. That evening, after William left to retrieve his children, I walked into the guest room, the room that had been quiet and empty for so long. I pulled back the vintage quilts, plumped the pillows, and laid out fresh towels. It had been years since I prepared a space for anyone other than myself. It felt right. It felt solid. As I placed a basket of William's old, cherished picture books near the bed, I heard my phone vibrate. It was Dorothy, my closest confidant. Text. Wine or whiskey? I'm arriving in 30 minutes either way. I smiled, typing my reply, wine, but bring an opener. Mine seems to have vanished during the Great Purge. The following morning felt different. Not a dramatic, life-altering change, but a subtle, foundational shift, the kind of quiet certainty one feels before the fog finally lifts. I woke with a clear, renewed sense of purpose. By 8 a.m. I had the ancient waffle iron fired up, fresh orange juice in the crystal pitcher, and a vase of cheerful yellow tulips on the kitchen table. I even unearthed the chipped, beloved ceramic mugs Frederick and I used in the early days, a subtle, unspoken reference to a happier, simpler past. Then I heard the familiar sound of William's SUV pulling into the driveway. They were home. William walked in first, clutching Scarlett's worn backpack and Jackson's massive gaming controller. He looked utterly drained, yet profoundly grounded, a man who had finally found an immovable foundation beneath the shifting sands of his life. Scarlett and Jackson followed, both hesitant, their small faces anxious. Scarlett hugged a tattered stuffed elephant. Jackson's fingers were tightly curled around a handheld device, his only anchor. "Grandma Ellie," Scarlett whispered, her voice barely audible. My carefully constructed composure instantly dissolved. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered back, sinking down to her level. "I've missed you so much." Jackson, my stoic, usually reserved grandson, barreled into my side with a fierce, demanding hug. We didn't speak of Tiffany. We didn't touch the subject of secret accounts, betrayal, or legal maneuvering. We simply sat down for breakfast, passing the maple syrup around like it was the most natural Saturday morning ritual in the world. Later, while the children were playing outside in the immense backyard, Jackson, reluctantly convinced by Scarlett to build a complex, architectural fort out of old patio cushions, William and I sat on the sun-drenched porch with cups of reheated coffee. "She told the kids I was away on a business trip," William said quietly, watching his children. "Tiffany?" I asked. He nodded. Didn't mention a single detail about the separation. Just that she'd be back soon. "They will need time to process this," I replied gently. But children are far more durable than we give them credit for. They can feel the presence of safety, even if they don't understand the chaos that made it necessary. He gave me a sideways, knowing glance. "You always have a perfectly tailored piece of wisdom for everything, Mother." "Old age," I replied, offering a small, genuine smile. "It comes with a rather expensive, hard-won PhD in human behavior. A degree in watching the same mistakes get repeated." He sipped his coffee. "I was so busy chasing the life Tiffany demanded, the country club memberships, the Gotthard ski trips, the impossible schools, that I never stopped to ask if it was the life we actually needed." "Few people do," I said. "Until something cracks the veneer." "It didn't just crack, Mom," he stated, his voice hollow. "It utterly shattered." We sat in companionable silence, watching Jackson try to teach Scarlett how to play a new video game. Then William spoke again. "I'm taking an extended leave of absence from the firm." That revelation truly surprised me. "Just for a few weeks. I need to focus on the children. And on myself. And," he looked directly at me, "on this. On us." I smiled. It wasn't a triumphant victory. It was a fragile, hard-won beginning. That afternoon, while Scarlett insisted on helping me fold an enormous mountain of laundry, mostly by transforming pillowcases into hand puppets, William was making a relentless series of calls from the study. He was setting up meetings with lawyers, child counselors, and his executive management team. I could sense his effort, the way he was desperately trying to hold his broken world together with sheer will. And that was the moment I realized I possessed something I hadn't fully appreciated in years. Leverage. Not the cynical, manipulative kind Tiffany had always accused me of wielding. No, this was the good kind, the power that comes from undeniable clarity, unshakable purpose, and the quiet, crushing realization of the ultimate truth. I picked up the phone and dialed Robert Sinclair. "Robert," I stated, my voice low and firm. "I think it's finally time." "Time for what, Ellie?" he asked, though I knew he suspected the answer. "I want to go public," I said. No more hiding behind the grieving widow facade. No more allowing the world to assume Frederick was the sole genius of this operation. I have been running Harrington Global Properties for the last 25 years. It is time the world acknowledged that. There was a long pause, followed by a low, delighted chuckle. "Took you long enough, you beautiful tyrant." "I also want to make a substantial revision to my estate planning," I added. "Tiffany's name needs to be meticulously and permanently removed from every document, every contingency, and every trust." "Already 10 steps ahead of you," he confirmed. I leaned back in the armchair, my heart beating with a steady, resolute rhythm. This was no longer about simple revenge. This was about restoration. That evening, William, with a hesitant but determined expression, made a disastrous, yet somehow perfect, dinner for the children. A massive batch of macaroni and cheese that contained an entire bag of shredded Gouda and a thoroughly questionable amount of curry powder. Scarlett declared it weird, but kind of amazing. Jackson simply shoved enormous mouthfuls into his face. I allowed them to stay up late, just long enough to watch one of those deeply sentimental animated movies where an assortment of woodland creatures saves the world using nothing but wholesome teamwork and an unwavering sense of whimsy. It seemed strangely appropriate for our circumstance. After the children were finally asleep, their small, comforting snores audible from the guest room, William and I sat on the antique sofa in the dim, soft light of the living room. I keep replaying all of it, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. All the years I simply let her take the lead. All the subtle, poisonous comments I chose not to question. The time she told me you didn't want to babysit anymore. The time she claimed you had conveniently forgotten Jackson's birthday. I kept my gaze fixed on the flickering candle on the mantelpiece. I never forgot a birthday, William. He nodded. I know that now. But I never asked for the proof then. It was easier to believe her. Easier than challenging her. People tend to fiercely protect the perceived status quo, I replied, even when that status quo is slowly and systematically destroying them. He looked at me, a profound, aching vulnerability in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. For shutting you out. For all of it. I reached over and firmly squeezed his hand. I am simply relieved you are finally here, William. That you woke up. Before he went to bed, William pulled a small, folded card from the inside pocket of his jacket. Not a secret account detail. Not a legal document. Just a simple, mass-produced birthday card. He placed it carefully on the side table. I bought this a week before the dinner, he explained. I intended to give it to you. I forgot I had it in my car. I waited until his footsteps faded on the stairs before I opened it. It was simple, perfect. Happy birthday, Mom. Thank you for everything you've done for me. I don't say it nearly enough, but I love you, William. And just like that, I finally wept. Not from the old pain of betrayal, but from the searing, overwhelming relief. After everything, after the years of silence, the calculated distance, the deliberate misjudgments, my son had finally found his way back. Not perfectly, not easily, but he was home. And that, in the ruins of my life, was everything. The first court date was scheduled for Friday morning. William wore a conservative navy suit I hadn't seen since Frederick's memorial service. Before he left, Scarlett insisted on placing her smooth, pink-shaped Lucky Rock in his jacket pocket. Jackson very seriously advised him to absolutely destroy the bad lady, which earned him a quick, whispered lesson on courtroom decorum and appropriate language. We dropped the children off at my dear friend Dorothy's home and drove to the courthouse together. William was silent, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. You are making the right decision, I stated simply. He offered a small, curt nod. I know. But it feels like a loss, regardless of the outcome. I didn't argue. A custody battle is never a clean victory. We sat side by side outside the courtroom, waiting. Then Tiffany arrived. She swept in like a glamorous, dark storm cloud, impeccably tailored black suit, lips painted an aggressive crimson, her phone pressed rigidly to her ear. She did not offer us a single glance. Her lawyer, a smooth, young man with an impossibly expensive haircut and shoes, trailed her like a paid shadow. William visibly tensed. I rested my hand firmly on his knee. Breathe, William, I whispered. The temporary custody hearing was mercifully brief. Tiffany's legal team came in aggressively, portraying her as the wounded victim of my decades-long financial and emotional manipulation. They claimed William had allowed me to weaponize my wealth to forcibly dismantle their marriage. But our side was armed with a simple, unyielding truth. Robert Sinclair was clinical, precise, and utterly unshakable. He presented the documents, The offshore wire transfers, the meticulous paper trail of William's house payments directed to the Children's Education Foundation, the damning investigators' photos. It was like watching a meticulously constructed house of cards collapse under the slightest breath. Tiffany never spoke. She stared straight ahead, her face frozen in defiant denial. By the end of the short hearing, the judge ruled, temporary full custody granted to William, with Tiffany allowed supervised visitation twice a month, pending a complete, thorough review of the financial evidence. We exited the courtroom in a shared, heavy silence. Outside, William let out a long, ragged, shaky breath. "I thought I would feel triumphant," he confessed. "You will," I assured him, "once the reality sinks in." A few days later, I stood in front of my antique full-length mirror, wearing a severe, impeccable pair of charcoal slacks I hadn't worn since my last confidential board meeting a decade prior. The fabric felt stiff, unfamiliar, yet necessary. Robert had arranged the official press announcement. The world was about to meet the true CEO of Harrington Global Properties. The CEO was me. We gathered at the downtown Chamber of Commerce office. The cameras flashed with a blinding ferocity I was entirely unused to. I stood next to Robert and several senior board members, my hands clasped calmly, as a flurry of reporters leaned in with their rapid-fire questions. "Mrs. Harrington, what prompted you to finally reveal your identity now?" I offered a calm, steady smile. It was simply time. The company required transparent, decisive leadership, and I was frankly weary of pretending someone else built and maintained this global firm for the past 25 years. Why the years of secrecy? That question was the most delicate. "Sometimes," I said, looking directly at the camera lens, "we are taught to diminish our own light, to quietly let others assume the credit. But I have learned that quiet strength does not equate to silence. It means patience." When I returned home, Scarlett met me at the door, her face radiant with excitement. "It's you," she exclaimed, holding up a frantic crayon drawing. "You're on a stage, and everyone is clapping." I studied the sketch. She had even added a tiny, distinct microphone in my hand. "Do I look powerful, Scarlett?" I asked. She nodded vehemently. "You look like a boss." That weekend, I hosted a small, carefully curated dinner party. Nothing ostentatious, just close friends, a simple, comforting lasagna, and far too much garlic bread. Dorothy came, of course, bringing a homemade lemon meringue pie and, true to form, immediately took over the kitchen cleanup. Robert Sinclair stopped by for a quick, celebratory glass of wine. And Henry, an old friend of Frederick's and a recently widowed retired history professor, sat beside me after the meal and told a joke so absurdly corny that I laughed until tears streamed down my face. William noticed the subtle shift. "Look at you, Mom," he said later, helping me carry a tray of empty glasses. Laughing, hosting, wearing that bold red lipstick. "You're different." I arched an eyebrow. "Is that an indictment?" He shrugged, bumping my shoulder playfully. "No. It's wonderful to see you actually living again." We rinsed the dishes in comfortable silence. Then he added, quietly, "Henry seems interested." I nearly dropped a piece of crystal. "Don't you dare start." "What?" He grinned. He was giving you the look all through dessert. "Oh, please. We are merely friends." He gently nudged my arm. "You are allowed to be more than just a CEO and a mother. You know that, don't you?" I dried a plate and looked at him. "So are you, William. So are you." The first few weeks of William and the children living in my home quickly established a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. Mornings were a chaotic circus of mismatched socks and inevitably spilled milk. Middays were marked by the persistent, rattling joy of Jackson's electronic drone crashing into the backyard fence. Evenings found me humming an old tune while preparing dinner, a simple act I hadn't performed since Frederick's passing. The house felt vibrant, loud, and gloriously alive. These were the sounds that filled the spaces Tiffany had systematically hollowed out. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was folding a stack of tiny pajamas, the phone rang. It was Tiffany's lawyer, sending over a new, formal request. She was demanding a one-time, substantial payout, a shocking $200,000 for emotional damages. William stared at the email, his jaw clenched. Emotional damages? I repeated, stirring my tea. You mean the damage she single-handedly inflicted upon her own marriage, our finances, and her children's sense of security? William leaned back, exhausted. I refuse to give her a single penny. But Robert is urging us to consider whether the cost of peace is worth this pathetic amount. Peace is an expensive, often elusive commodity, William, I said. But you hold all the leverage. This is not about spite. It's about protecting Jackson and Scarlett's inheritance. If she thinks she can simply cash out and walk away with a bonus, she will never learn. He nodded. I know. But a foolish part of me keeps hoping for some acknowledgement of the pain she caused. One simple apology. You are waiting for something she is incapable of providing, I stated gently. Closure rarely comes with a formal apology, William. That is one of the agonizing, hard-earned truths you only learn after surviving the deep end of your own heartbreak. A few days later, my friend Dorothy called. Are you home, Ellie? She asked. I'm on my way. I have news. And I'm bringing donuts. That was Dorothy's code for a significant, probably dramatic revelation. She arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a box of glazed donuts and a small, folded piece of paper. I found something, she announced. Remember Maggie Wilson's retirement party last year? I nodded. I didn't go. Tiffany claimed it was a younger crowd event. Dorothy rolled her eyes. Of course she did. Well, I went. And Tiffany was there, loudly consuming far too much champagne and sharing secrets a little too casually. She handed me the paper. It was a printed, grainy screenshot from Maggie's public social media post. In the background of a group selfie, Tiffany was clearly visible, sitting far too close to a man I didn't recognize, his hand resting with intimate familiarity on her knee. There's more, Dorothy whispered. My neighbor, Cheryl, who was also there, overheard Tiffany bragging that she had the perfect setup, a rich husband, a completely clueless mother-in-law, and a direct pipeline to endless luxury. My stomach twisted with cold certainty. She knew. I whispered the words. She knew for years where the money originated. Dorothy nodded grimly. And she treated it as a running joke. The last flicker of my pity for Tiffany instantly dissolved. That evening, I told William everything. She was laughing about it, William, I said, the bitterness rising like acid in my throat. She used the money I gave her to openly mock me, to fund her cheating, and to systematically spoil herself. He sat at the dining table, his arms crossed, staring at the empty air. Then, his voice almost inaudible, he spoke. I think, deep down, I always knew. I just couldn't bring myself to face the truth. Do you want to submit this to your lawyer? I asked. Yes, he said, instantly. And I want to keep this to show the children one day, when they are mature enough. I want them to fully understand the reality of what really happened here. I studied his face, the quiet, emerging strength, the resolution that was replacing his old passivity. You are becoming the man Frederick always hoped you would be, William. He looked at me, a soft, rare light in his eyes. It only took me 3 decades, Mom. That weekend, we took Jackson and Scarlett to the sprawling city zoo. It was not a court-mandated activity or a desperate distraction. It was simply life, moving forward. Scarlett shrieked with genuine delight at the flamingos. Jackson, usually aloof, spent a full 30 minutes mesmerized by the sea otters. We ate ridiculous, overpriced soft pretzels and posed for a silly photo in front of the giraffe enclosure. At one point, William leaned down and whispered, I think this is the first full day in years that I haven't felt like I was drowning. That is how you measure genuine healing, William, I replied. When you finally stop holding your breath. As the next court date approached, Tiffany's legal team began to falter, requesting a sudden, lengthy delay, citing extreme emotional stress. Robert didn't object. The more time she buys, the more rope she gives herself, Ellie. She is desperately hoping William will cave, I stated. She will be sorely disappointed, he assured me. That night, after the children were asleep, William and I spent an hour watching Frederick's old home movies. At one point, a fuzzy video showed William at age 8, holding a cardboard tube microphone, introducing me as the smartest, strongest lady in the entire world. He looked at the screen and offered a rare, melancholic smile. I don't recall ever saying that. I do, I said. I never, ever forgot it. He reached over and took my hand. I'm sorry it took me this long to finally come back. You didn't just come back, William, I corrected gently. You woke up. Outside, the storm clouds were gathering low and bruised across the night sky, but inside my home, the light remained steadfastly on. For the first time in an age, the future felt less like a looming threat and more like something we were deliberately and strongly building together. 2 weeks passed before we received any new communication from Tiffany. Her lawyer sent a single, frigid email, noticeably less aggressive than the previous ones. They were now open to negotiation. That, in legal terms, was the definitive sign that she was cornered and knew it. William read the message aloud at the kitchen table while Scarlett and Jackson were in the next room, frantically constructing a pillow fort, Dragon's Lair. She is willing to settle, he said slowly, scrolling down the screen. No alimony. Partial custody only if it's joint. And she's dropped the exorbitant one-time payout. I continued to stir my tea. The demand for money was just a desperate opening bid. I'm not giving her another chance, William stated firmly. But Robert suggests we consider whether the cost of peace is worth this pathetic amount. Peace is an expensive, often elusive commodity, William, I said. But you hold all the leverage. This is not about spite. It's about protecting Jackson and Scarlett's inheritance. If she thinks she can simply cash out and walk away with a bonus, she will never learn. He nodded. I know. But a foolish part of me keeps hoping for some acknowledgement of the pain she caused. One simple apology. You are waiting for something she is incapable of providing, I stated gently. Closure rarely comes with a formal apology, William. That is one of the agonizing, hard-earned truths you only learn after surviving the deep end of your own heartbreak. The next few days were unsettlingly quiet. Then, on Thursday morning, the doorbell rang. William was out with the children, attending a scheduled therapy session. I was in the middle of preparing a complex pastry batter when I heard the sharp, impatient knocking. I opened the door, and there she stood again, Tiffany. No designer sunglasses this time. No sharp blazer. Just a pair of rumpled jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt, and deeply puffy, exhausted eyes. Can I come in? She asked, her voice a hollow shell of its former sharpness. I paused. The temptation to simply close the door was immense. But the curiosity and the simple desire to finally look the enemy in the eye one last time won. I stepped aside. She walked into the living room like a pale, hesitant ghost. We sat in the cavernous space, and I waited. I'm not here to wage war, she said finally, after a long, profound silence. I honestly don't recognize myself anymore. The complete collapse of her facade was shocking. Everything I thought defined me, the status, the money, the perfect life, it's all just evaporated. Marcus left. He said I was too much trouble. Can you believe that? Too complicated. She gave a weak, pathetic laugh. I remained silent. I miss my children, she confessed, her gaze fixed on the floor. I know I have been a terrible mother, and an even worse wife, and yes, definitely the most appalling daughter-in-law. She nodded, wiping a stray tear. I don't expect your forgiveness, Eleanor. But I need to see Jackson and Scarlett again. Even if it's supervised, even if they hate me. They're still mine. They don't hate you, I corrected softly. They are deeply confused. But they're resilient. Tears welled up in her eyes again. I never wanted to be the villain in this story. The villains rarely ever do, I said simply. But here we are. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm not asking for pity. Just an opportunity to see them. I will accept whatever I can salvage. I looked at her, truly seeing the desperation in her broken expression. For the first time in years, she didn't look manipulative. She looked genuinely fractured. I was not going to trust her, but perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally glimpsed the truth of her own reflection. I will discuss this with William, I stated, my voice measured. But this decision will be his alone, not mine. She stood slowly, gathering the remnants of her composure. Thank you. She hesitated at the front door. "Eleanor," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I never said it, but thank you for everything you did for us. For the generosity I abused." I offered no answer. I wasn't sure I believed her yet, and I was unwilling to offer false solace. When William returned, I told him the entire exchange. "She came here?" he asked, stunned. "She cried. She begged," I said. He frowned. "And do you genuinely believe any of it?" "I believe she is utterly and completely broken, William," I said. "And people rarely manage to fake that state convincingly." He nodded slowly. "I'll speak to Robert. We will allow supervised visits once the court has finalized the custody terms." Then his voice quieted further. "I just don't want the children to suffer another betrayal." "I know," I said. "And I promise, William, I will not let that happen." The subsequent court hearing was remarkably swift. Tiffany formally withdrew her full custody claim. She agreed to the supervised visits twice a month, with no overnight stays. The financial payout was completely abandoned. It felt as though the years of built-up tension had finally been released, thinning the suffocating atmosphere into something breathable. William took the children out for celebratory ice cream afterwards. I stayed home and prepared a rich, comforting shepherd's pie, a deeply Midwestern instinct, but profoundly soothing. That evening, as Scarlett climbed into my lap with her worn picture book and Jackson leaned against my side, I looked across the room at William. He smiled. No words were needed. Only peace. The subsequent spring arrived early, with the dogwood trees in the front yard blooming far too soon, as if they were desperate for a fresh start, much like the three of us. My once quiet, formal home was now a sanctuary alive with Scarlett's infectious belly laughs, Jackson's dramatic dinosaur sound effects, and William's cautious, growing sense of hope. Every morning felt like a small, exquisite miracle. One afternoon, while William was taking a conference call upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with the children. Scarlett was drawing our future house, complete with a whimsical garden full of rainbow-colored jelly bean bushes. Jackson was devouring a massive piece of toast. "Grandma," Scarlett asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Where's Mommy now?" The question landed with a soft, quiet thud. "She is living in a different place now, sweetheart," I said, gently, "so that she and Daddy don't have to argue anymore." She nodded, still coloring. "But why did she lie so often?" Jackson looked up, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, Mommy used to say you were a mean lady, but you're not." My heart clenched, but I kept my voice light and steady. "Sometimes," I explained, "people say things when they are scared, or when they want to excuse their own mistakes." Scarlett considered that for a moment. "So, she made a huge amount of mistakes." "Yes," I said. "She absolutely did. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." She paused, then reached across the table and placed her tiny hand over mine. "I love you, Grandma Ellie," she said simply. Jackson nodded in profound agreement. "Me too. More than the entire internet." That, coming from a 13-year-old boy, was the highest possible form of devotion. That afternoon, while the children were napping, William came downstairs, his face bearing a faraway, thoughtful expression. "I think we should move," he announced. I blinked, startled. "Move where?" "Move out," he clarified, gesturing vaguely around the room. "All of us. This house, your sanctuary, it saved us. But maybe it is time to deliberately start somewhere new. A fresh, clean chapter." "You want to buy a new house?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I want to buy it with you," he stated firmly. "Something we choose together. A home we build as an official family, not out of crisis, but out of a conscious, deliberate choice." My first, instinctive reaction was to cling to the past. This house held Frederick's memory, William's entire childhood, and decades of my own unacknowledged labor. But perhaps that was precisely the point. We had done the agonizing work of digging up the rot. Now it was time to plant something new, something that had a chance to flourish without the shadows of the past. "I would like that very much, William," I said softly. The house hunting process was surprisingly easy. William, armed with his spreadsheets, was ruthlessly efficient. Scarlett had whimsical demands. Jackson insisted on a secret gaming bunker and an absence of all arachnids. We finally settled on an expansive, sun-drenched ranch-style home with enough open space for the children to run wild and, crucially, a separate, beautiful in-law suite where I could work, rest, and remain both fully a part of the family and quietly independent. When we signed the final papers, William looked over at me and said, "This time, Mom, no secrets. Equal partners." I squeezed his hand. No more hiding. In the days leading up to the move, I found myself going room to room, offering quiet farewells. I lingered in the old master bedroom, where Frederick used to read with his glasses perched on his nose. I ran my fingers over the grand wooden banister, where William, at age 9, had crashed his homemade go-kart, earning a week of silent treatment. I stood in the kitchen, recalling the precise spot where Frederick and I had our one and only argument about whether or not cinnamon belongs in savory chili. It emphatically does not. In the back of the hallway closet, I found one last sweater of his, mustard-colored, soft at the elbows, and still faintly smelling of his preferred woodsy cologne. I folded it gently and slipped it into my purse. Some things, I knew, you simply do not leave behind. Moving day was a blur of cardboard chaos, frantic movers, and ridiculously happy children leaping onto bare mattresses. "This is what starting over looks like, huh?" William said, grinning wildly amidst the clutter. "Messy, loud, and profoundly beautiful," I confirmed. That evening, we stood on our new front porch, watching the spectacular sunset. Henry appeared at the side gate, holding a huge potted orchid as a housewarming gift. "Something resilient," he said with a wink. "To grow with the house." "Did we make the right move, Mom?" William asked quietly. I looked at the vast, open yard, the sweeping sky, and the glow of laughter already pouring from the new, unfamiliar windows. "I believe, William," I said, "that we have finally, decisively moved forward." A few nights later, we hosted our first dinner in the new place. Dorothy brought her famous chicken salad. Henry arrived with a box of old jazz records and, inevitably, accidentally sat on a pair of Scarlett's glittery ballet flats. We ate outside on the spacious patio beneath the soft glow of the string lights William had meticulously strung up with Jackson's help. The music played softly. Forks clinked, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like a guest in my own existence. "I read your quote in the business journal," Henry said, sipping his iced tea. "The one about how true leadership is ultimately just another form of love." I felt my cheeks warm. I didn't think they would actually print that line. "They printed it in bold," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Right at the very top." William beamed, a possessive pride radiating from him. "She's famous now." Jackson's teacher showed it to the entire class. I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. If I had known I was going to become a corporate role model at 80, I would have certainly started moisturizing more diligently. After everyone had left, I stood alone on the back porch, the cool night air wrapping around me like a soft, comforting blanket. I thought of the woman I was just 6 months prior, the one sitting utterly alone in Il Sapor Antico, sauce on her shoes, profound shame in her heart. She felt like a faded photograph now. This version of me was saturated with truth, surrounded by family, driven by genuine purpose, and perhaps, finally, at peace. 6 months later, autumn arrived with a quiet, golden simplicity. The leaves on the front lawn were a carpet of stunning reds and golds, and the air was crisp enough that I started making my grandmother's rich, complex butternut squash soup again. The new house had fully assimilated us. It no longer smelled of fresh paint and chaotic unpacked boxes, but of cinnamon, the faint scent of Scarlett's hairspray, and the perpetual, gentle aroma of glue from Jackson's endless model airplane projects. It was unequivocally ours now. The real legacy was in the details. One Friday afternoon, as I was walking to the mailbox, I saw it, a letter folded neatly, my name scrawled in a slanted, unfamiliar handwriting. Tiffany. I stood on the driveway for a long, still moment before I took it inside. The letter was short. No apology, no defense, just a cold update. She was moving out of the state, starting a new job, hoping to stay in touch with the children someday when the time is appropriate. It was not dramatic. It was not warm. But it was definitive. I folded the letter and placed it into the drawer where I kept the children's drawings and William's most cherished childhood keepsakes. Closure, I realized, rarely arrives in the form of a grand dramatic speech. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a plain envelope, and sometimes that is enough. That weekend, we built a bonfire in the spacious backyard, just the four of us. William played his rescued, old guitar, a slightly off-key rendition of a classic rock tune. Scarlett sang made-up lyrics about roasting marshmallows under the moonlight. Jackson, predictably, attempted to roast a large banana. As the fire crackled, William turned to me, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. "You know what I finally realized, Mom," he said. "Tell me, William. We didn't just rebuild a life here. We constructed something far more important. A true legacy." I smiled. "And what, precisely, does that legacy look like?" He looked toward the fire, where his children were giggling over their sticky fingers. "It looks like healing," he said. "It looks like kids who know they are profoundly loved, and a father who has finally learned that true love is not about control, but about showing up. Every single day. Even when it is impossibly hard." I nodded. "That is all I ever wanted for you, William." "I know," he said. "I just couldn't see the truth of it before." The next morning, I rose early, made the children's lopsided cloud cakes, and watched the sun stretch its fingers across the yard. I realized something so quiet, so profound, that it almost slipped by. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for William's approval. Not for Tiffany's apology. Not even for corporate recognition. I had already arrived. I was irrevocably home, in the joyous cacophony of the children, in the quiet, profound understanding of my son, in the persistent, patient possibility of Henry's smile, and in the woman I had finally become. A woman who no longer needed to prove her worth to anyone. She knew it. She lived it. And every single moment from here on out was unequivocally hers to claim. So here we are at the end of a long winding story woven with heartache, strength, silence, and truth. You've listened through the hurt, through the shattered plates, the long nights, and the fragile mornings when love barely whispered, but still showed up. Thank you for staying. Because this wasn't just a story about a woman wronged. It was about rebuilding slowly, intentionally from the inside out. About how dignity isn't loud, but it's steady. About how love, the real kind, has nothing to prove but everything to protect. I hope you noticed what I tried to show you. That control isn't power. Secrets don't preserve relationships. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop shrinking to fit into someone else's story. Eleanor didn't just reclaim her life, she redefined it. She taught us that being forgotten doesn't make you invisible. That being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. And that being pushed aside only sharpens your sense of where you truly belong. So wherever you are right now, folding laundry, lying under your blankets, maybe even blinking away a few tears, I want you to ask yourself this. What are you building? Because every word you speak, every boundary you draw, every act of forgiveness you give to yourself, those are bricks. And brick by brick, you're creating something no one can take from you. Your truth, your peace, your legacy. Now let that settle. Breathe a little deeper. And if you like this journey, I've left 2 more stories on the screen that I think you'll love. But only press play when you're ready. Until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling with me. Good night.